Welcome to the Urban Spokesman. My name is Chris Sanders. Here today I have Shawn Garcia. He is the Director of Advocacy at Transportation Alternatives, here to talk to us and tell us about, what he's been doing, what Transportation Alternatives has been doing to make the streets better for New York, more livable for the people of New York City. All right. So, Shawn, go on ahead. Tell everyone a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for having me, Chris. I've been following the show and the progress of the show has been really exciting to see all the stuff you've been covering. And, we've known each other for a little bit now. We've been talking about trying to organize this. So it's great to have this finally going. Again, my name is Shawn Garcia. I'm the Director of Advocacy at Transportation Alternatives. And for those who are not familiar with TA, if you've been watching Chris's show, you probably know a little bit of our work. But TA has been around for over 50 years in New York City. We're the oldest transit equity, urban planning advocacy organization in New York City. Doing the work very on a grassroots level in the community, working with local community members to really push forward our streetscape to be a more livable, equitable, safer place for everyone. For me, right now we're actually it's weird where we're sitting. So if you don't know by the background, we're sitting on Broadway on 22nd Street in Manhattan, New York City, and I actually went to school on 20 high school on 22nd Street and 6th Avenue, just up the block. We're right by the Flatiron Building, and I actually in high school I started cycling. I started riding my bike around New York City. You know, you could probably tell from the grades that high school was not in this century. It was in the 90s for me. But in the 90s, I remember a vivid memory right next to the Flatiron Building that a cyclist got hit by a car. And I was maybe 16, 17 years old. And I walked out of school after school on a day much like today. And I saw this guy who, his head was open and he was, it was really a very scary scene and people were panicked. And now, I'm sitting here 20 years later, or a little bit more than 20 years, but some years later, and we're sitting on Broadway where we're on a mixed road with massive daylighting, pedestrian plazas, city bike share in the background, bike lanes, cyclists all over the place. It's just transformed, and that is due in large part to a lot of the advocacy people like me and Chris have been doing in this city for decades now. And CA is really proud to help, bring forward a lot of that community energy and move our city in a way that, really makes it safer and livable for everyone. So super proud to be part of that organization. Yeah.
Awesome, awesome, great intro. So, so let me ask you. So transportation alternatives, they advocate for the streets. Like, how is that different than what Riders Alliance or Bike NYC is doing? They have I guess the city bike ride or whatever
Hmm.
every year. Um, how is what Transportation Alternatives is doing compared to Bike NYC or Riders Alliance?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, we would consider ourselves part of this transit equity space where there's a couple different organizations who have been doing the work. Some have been doing it from the planning and legislative side and, working in the urban planning space for many years, like RPA is a great example. They're over 100 years old. You have Bike New York that does a lot of advocacy, but their primary focus is bicycle education. So doing a lot of classes for adults, children, partnering with institutions and schools to really uplift bicycle education and get bicycle education more normalized in New York City. It's really just like how we talk about swimming needs to be a skill set that everyone has, and everyone should have access at a very young age to swim classes. Same thing with bicycle education, right? It's really an equity issue that we live in a urban city where, biking is one of the most viable ways to get around this city, safest, most affordable ways, but a lot of kids don't have access to bicycles or don't know how to ride a bike or how to do it safely. So that's really a lot of the focus for Bike New York, in addition to the bike advocacy. And then you have organizations like Riders Alliance, which really focuses on public transportation, so they're really trying to organize riders who are using our public transportation system to better improve, how that system is working from a grassroots end, right? So like we need more elevator access because this community has a lot of folks who, live with disabilities or older adults, and we need to fight for this elevator in this, at this train station, or we need a busway on this corridor because there's tons of traffic and people are not able to get around their community. And, like Fordham Road is a great example in the Bronx. Fordham Road, nearly 80% of people use public transportation, walking or bicycling as their daily form of transit, but there's no busway on Fordham Road. And the bus, even though it's a select service express bus, it moves at 4 miles per hour. It's one of the slowest bus routes in all of the United States. So Riders Alliance really focuses on that. While at TA, our focus, we do a little bit of it all. So we focus on the public transportation, we focus on bike education, social rides, promoting bicycling, but we really talk about transportation access generally, so how can we transform our streets so it's safer, not only for cyclists, but also for pedestrians, people who are walking, using sidewalks, people who need curb cuts, people who have limited mobility, people who maybe are living with some visual or hearing impairment. So we really come at it from that end. And we also are very activist driven. And what I mean by that is, even though we have a staff of, nearly 40 people, that 40 people is not a lot to cover all the work that needs to happen in New York City.
No,
so we're really activist driven.
So let me ask you, so how do you think Yodanis Rodriguez, the New York City Department of Transportation, Eric Adams, how do you think they're doing in terms of transportation access, pedestrian access, cyclist access, bus lanes, bike lanes, all that? How do you think they are doing overall so far since Eric Adams got elected in 2021?
Yeah, I mean, so when Eric Adams came into office, from our perspective as transit equity organizations, he came in with a lot of good commitments, and it came in with very strong stances on our work and trying to fight for more equity and trying to make sure, especially communities of color and outer boroughs, were getting the same access that more affluent white neighborhoods were getting. And that's very aligned with what we wanted. So we were very optimistic when he first came in. But things have changed.
what exactly changed?
So I think, politicians make a lot of commitments. So you always got to take it with a grain of salt. Yeah. A lot of commitments. And, you got to, you have to be optimistic in this work because this work is not easy. Trying to move a city forward, especially a city like New York City that serves so many people, it's really hard work to get things to move forward. So we're always optimistic when an elected official comes in with some good promises. But really, Eric Adams has shown time and time again since getting in office that he's not really supportive of those commitments that he's made, and has really fallen short not only on, the infrastructure that he's promised, but even in terms of the safety and enhancements and policy that he said that he was going to stand behind. He has really fallen short in a lot of ways and has been a big disappointment. There has been progress though, so we don't want to discount some of the progress that's been happening on the city. And there's been progress, but it's been really, really a battle. And in many ways, Eric Adams has become a force that we've had to deal with versus, we thought he was going to be a partner and we thought he was going to help move the work forward.
Can he still be a partner in the future?
I mean, again, the work is hard. So we're always looking for, moving people in the right direction. And so whenever we're talking to elected officials, whether it be the mayor or city council member, whoever it is, we always want to give them the opportunity to do the right thing. We're always over communicating how they can do the right thing. We're always trying to make sure that constituents, people from the community, are speaking about their needs and expressing it to these elected officials. We want to elevate those voices and make sure that the elected officials are having that communication. So for sure, he can still make a big turnaround. We're hopeful that he will. But there's definitely a lot of critiques over what he's done since getting in office.
Okay. And so you're Latino and I'm black here. So we are we are not the typical people who are promoting uh, safe streets, transportation, all that. I wanted to ask you about black and brown neighborhoods. It
Yes.
seems like in New York, in Manhattan, even, which Manhattan has the most bike lanes, all that, compared to all the other boroughs in New York City. But I noticed that in places like Harlem or Inwood or Washington Heights, the bike lanes, they're not there, they're not as good. Um, in the Bronx, I know they canceled that bus lane project. What would you, what, I'm curious about why do you think that is? And what can activists, the audience, do to get people of all racial backgrounds, all income levels, safe streets, access, bike lane, bus lane, pedestrian access, good sidewalks, daylighting, all that. What would you say to those people?
Oof.
I know
You're
that's
coming
a
with the
huge
questions, Chris.
question.
You're coming with the
Sorry,
questions.
sorry,
You
sorry.
know, this is a big one. I mean, it probably is the most important one in my mind for sure. So I'm glad you asked it. I think so I'll start first on the what the city should be doing, elected officials, the Department of Transportation, the folks making the decisions. You know, it's a combination of commitment to communities that have been historically disinvested in. Like institutional racism does not only manifest in our schools and where jobs are. It definitely manifests in transportation and how people can access the city, right? And some transit times, like you said, in Inwood to get to work, I mean, it could be up to 2 hours to get into, the main business district to get to work. While others have a 15-minute city and they live in a different reality.
Oh,
And so there's like a historic wrong and injustice that's happened in our cities. Robert Moses is a one that someone we like to point to, but he's just a
oh,
reflection of like
yeah,
the institutional
he's an
racism.
out and out racist.
Exactly. And so there's like historic wrongs that have to be changed, right? So there's an investment and a commitment to investment that has to happen in communities of color, in outer borough neighborhoods. Then it also is a combination of, political will. So you have to have political leaders in these spaces, in these communities that are willing to move the work forward and sometimes take the unpopular position, right? Because if you go
Is it
into
unpopular?
if you go not so much in Harlem and Manhattan neighborhoods, but there's some communities of color in outer borough neighborhoods that are they're more car reliant
Mm,
because they don't have as many transit options, right? So it might be
got it.
unpopular to promote a bike lane in a neighborhood where a lot of people aren't cycling yet. But there needs to be political leadership to say like, hey, I know there's not a lot of cycling right now, and I know there's not a lot of people using the bus right now, but if we build it, they will come. If we make this option for people, people will start using it. You need a political leader like that. So you need a commitment from the city and leadership,
From the
and then
city.
you need the local leaders to to take political
Local
stances.
leaders to actually be leaders rather than
Exactly.
followers.
Exactly. And then that's on the political end, and I think that's more of where we need the energy from, right? Because that's where the money is, that's where the power is held, those institutions. So, but then on the community level, I think what we run into is that in communities that again have been historically disinvested in, there are times when investment in community comes with a lot of skepticism, right? People are like,
Yes. Yes.
Why are you investing in our
Why are you all of a
neighborhood?
sudden investing in our
Exactly.
community?
Why are you building this bike lane?
The only
Who's it
time I see
for? Yes,
you investing in the community is when the rent's about to go up.
exactly. And that's justified, right? Gentrification is
I mean,
real,
it is, yeah,
and the fears that people of color and people and you know, and that's a real concern, right? And how do you overcome that concern is also through political leadership, but is also through grassroots organizing, getting community members who are leading the conversations, right? The city agencies need to come into community and really want to partner with community members and really listen to community members.
so
But then, yeah, go ahead.
let me sorry to
Yeah,
interrupt.
yeah, no.
I wanna so um so so you're saying that, so how do we go from what we have in Manhattan
Mm,
right now, in Brooklyn, Bronx, Queens, Staten Island, where it's like every community has different street uh, street infrastructure. Like one community, they got bike lanes, they got, you know, delivery zones, they got walkable spaces. Another community, they've got highways practically running through it, or stroads, as some people in the urbanist community call them, running straight through,
yep.
and they have high pollution and all that. How do you get a city where, you know, safe streets is normal and basic for everybody?
Yeah.
Like a bike lane shouldn't be something that triggers an emotional response for people afraid that their rent is going to go up.
Right. No, I mean it's a very tricky thing. I think there's a lot of good people in government and in city agencies who are always trying to tackle this question. I would say that where a lot of the missed opportunities are, well, one, when it comes to safe streets, that just needs to happen, right? Like, yes, community engagement is really important, but you don't want to over engage to the point where a very small minority could cripple the progress on a project that is just basic safety, right? Like daylighting, you know, bump outs, curbs, slower speeds by schools, common sense stuff. This stuff just needs to happen, right? Like,
Yeah.
and you know, I want community to be engaged in that process, but also like that is a different kind of project than something that is an enhancement that could change, you know, the demographic of a neighborhood. So but then at the same time, it's if they're like Central Harlem is a great example, and I know you're very passionate about this. I'm
You
also
know,
a
I'm
Harlem
passionate
kid,
about Central
so
Harlem.
you know the Central Harlem right now has no protected bike lanes.
None.
None. And it's in Manhattan where there's tons of protected bike lanes, and it's like a clear disinvestment. It's a
Divide.
clear divide. It's a clear gap in the system.
110.
Yeah,
Anything above 110.
yeah. And it's just like that needs to be fixed. Like, yes, community needs to be engaged, but that project needs to be accelerated. Like the Adam Clayton Boulevard bike lane that you and others have been advocating for. You know, this would be from 110th Street in Central Park, which I know you've explained on your show, but it would run all the way up 7th Avenue, Adam Clayton Powell, all the way up to the Macomb Dam Bridge, connecting the Bronx to Central Park, which of course would not only serve everyone in Harlem, in Central Harlem, but also everyone in the Bronx, everyone trying to get to upstate New York, everyone trying to access all the beautiful greenways and all the bike paths on that prior trail. That would all be solved with that connection point.
Yeah,
That's
that would
something
be
that should not be as contentious as it is. And that's
it
showing a
shouldn't.
lack of leadership by the city
Yeah,
to make it happen.
we haven't, you know, I've been advocating for it for like 2 or 3 years, and it seems like it shouldn't be, it should be normal. And, you know, I went to the community board last year, and, you know, they were primarily concerned with parking. And look, I was happy to speak to them, even though they disagreed, but I think that the community board itself is not necessarily, in that instance, it's not necessarily always reflecting the community at large. And in a lot of cases, there's a part of me that says you have to allow the freedom to for all of the transportation options and not just one or two. Like, you have people riding the city bike, riding the scooters and the wheels and whatever. Even the wheelchair people use the bike lane a lot of
Right,
time.
right. That's right.
So,
And they
so
can and they should, for sure.
they really,
But
yeah.
the lane should be wider so that we can
So
have
that,
multi-use of different type of riders.
so yeah, I feel like that's a missed. Yeah, I really feel like that's a missed opportunity. We've got Eric Adams as the mayor. We've got Adrian Adams as the speaker of the council, and it's really a missed opportunity. I noticed that city council last year unblocked the creation of the bike lanes, but uh, it, there has been no new bike lane or bus lane project announced
That's right.
within the last 320 days, so almost a year, without any notable progress.
That's right.
What is going on? What is that all about?
I mean, it's really disheartening. Again, I think it's, there's a lot of budgetary, blaming it on the budget, blaming it on this elected, the DOT blaming it on the mayor blaming it on the DOT blaming it on the community board. There's a lot of pointing fingers.
Yeah.
And it's like at the end of the day, who are the power brokers?
Look over there.
Exactly. Who can move forward these projects? Who can make that money manifest? We know Eric Adams has a lot to do with that. We know the mayor has a lot to do with that. And we need that political leadership. I mean, and it's even worse when we're talking about bus lanes, because the commitments that were made to establishing bus lanes and the small percentage of bus lanes that were actually completed, I mean, we're talking less than 6% of committed bus lanes actually happened. It's really, really, really disheartening.
Yeah, that and what would you tell someone who like how should they go about their activism? Knowing
Who do
we
you go
are
at?
in a
Who do you point to?
hostile
Yeah.
environment, how do they channel their activism, their need, their frustration in a way that's productive in a hostile political environment right now with Eric Adams, Ingrid Lewis Martin, who I know he relies on her a lot. So, like, how are we able to move, Eric and his friends uh, to be more, yeah. I'm
Yeah.
curious as to how if Eric Adams was sitting right here, what would you say to him, or Eric Adams and Ingrid Lewis Martin, what would you say to him and her and about, moving safe streets, protected bike lanes and bus lanes forward, like other cities are moving it forward. France, you look at Paris, Mayor Hidalgo, she was facing a corruption investigation and they still voted for her and they still supported her. And Paris is like a whole new city now. And I feel in some ways when I'm visiting these other countries, like I feel like, oh, New York's kind of falling behind a little bit. And
100%.
we're supposed to be the best.
Yeah, I know. I mean, that would be one thing I speak to, right? Like, if we're supposed to be leaders in the world on so many things, like, how are we falling so far behind on this? I think that's a big point to make with someone like Eric Adams, who, he has a little bit of ego, so you want to feed into that a little bit. But I would say no. I mean, honestly, there's two crises that we have, right? We're dealing with a street safety crisis, right? Some of the highest rates of traffic fatalities in New York City history have been happening in the past few years. And notably, cyclists have been killed, children have been killed, and elderly. And so there's a crisis, right? Like, we need to be transparent about that, and there needs to be very serious political action to address that crisis, like we would any crisis. And then the other crisis that we're dealing with is the environmental crisis, right? Climate, our world is burning. We had an earthquake in New York City last week. Like, there is a serious climate crisis. And when we're talking about transit and transit equity and making a more livable, sustainable, and affordable city, we're also talking about environmental justice and making real dramatic changes, like congestion pricing is coming. Eric Adams needs to be a leader.
What's your opinion on that?
Well, before I'll get to that. I'm gonna get to that. We got to talk about congestion pricing. But before we get to that, I wanted to say what the activists should be thinking about.
Yes.
So activism and advocacy is critical to our government functioning well. You cannot have a true democracy without a very strong advocacy components. right? Like sometimes when people think about government, they think about the three bodies of government, all these kind of things. Advocacy in many ways is that fourth. And it's that people power and people coming together to express what's important to them in an organized way to push government and to push, law and to push progress forward. And when people jump into advocacy, they need to really see themselves as part of that. You are part of this functioning democracy and government. You're not just a rebel rouser. You're not just trying to burn things down. Like there's strategies, there's different types of activism. But if you come in with that mindset and understand that you're a critical player in the conversation, you also have to understand that your strategy has to be dynamic and always changing. So sometimes the energy might be pressuring the mayor, which I think right now the mayor needs a little bit of pressure. He needs some fire under his feet. The pressure might be like the DOT, the city agencies. What are you doing with the money? Be more accountable, be more transparent. The city might be, the advocacy might be on the federal government or the state. You need to bring in more funds to support, transit equity in our city. But at the end of the day, the most important power that advocates have, the number one thing, regardless of who the target is people power. You need to organize your folks. You need to be in your community. You need to be having conversations with your neighbors. You need to be joining an advocacy organization like TA or Riders Alliance or, the different ones that you named. Join these organizations. Be part of the conversation. Don't just be a critic from the side saying, oh, Eric Adams, you're doing bad. You're doing bad. Be involved in the process.
Yeah, help them do good.
Yeah, help him, push them in the right direction, And, a lot of the times, a lot of these elected officials who do want to do the right thing, if they don't have that advocacy and that grassroots community support, that window for them to do the right thing is actually very small politically, right? Because they have to think about their jobs,
right.
And like you mentioned what's going on in Paris, it's like, if there's not people power behind that decision, it's very hard to make that decision. But if you can make a people power movement that truly is pushing forward safe streets, pushing forward bike infrastructure, pushing forward this equitable city, that people power will move politicians in the right direction.
Now, so yeah, that's an excellent point. What do you say when, the DOT, what do you have for them when it comes to for a lot of people, especially like minorities and Black people and Latino people, all that, I feel like sometimes we need what are we getting behind? Becomes the question. What are we actually getting behind? Safe streets, what does that even mean? What is, does it mean I'm going to lose my parking space? Does it mean that, the rent is going up? With the DOT, a lot of times, we're pushing the DOT on safe streets, but what? I feel like sometimes they want us to push for something, but then we don't really have anything to get there's no project to get behind, or there's no we want to protect the bike lane on Adam Clayton Powell, but what does that mean? Is it even feasible? Has the DOT studied it? How is on some level I feel like it's like a chicken and egg problem, where especially, and probably it's magnified for minority communities in general, is that you want them to advocate for something. One, they have jobs, they have
That's
other concerns that are more pressing, but then the DOT won't come in and make things safe and livable for them until it's literally almost too late. Or I shouldn't say it's never too late to do the right thing, but that's always going to be the hurdle for DOT, is that, the community didn't lead on it, and the communities who typically lead on these sort of things are the richer, whiter communities, I would say. And so how is transportation alternatives and other advocacy groups how do they account for that? That's a hard problem to solve.
Yeah.
And how can DOT be helpful there? Like, if I felt like if they put plans forward, did more actual community activism with the community board,
Hmm.
in addition to having, TA and other groups
Yeah.
involved, I think they might be able to see more progress there, which would make some of these things more normal and less less emotionally triggering
Yeah.
for a lot of people, especially like older people who they haven't been orange pilled
Right,
yet,
right, right,
or they don't look at the internet. They're not
right.
terminally online or anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're bringing up so many good points. It's populations that are already overburdened and overtaxed through the, structural racism and classism that you've been speaking to, right? Like, there's certain communities that don't even have the mental capacity in their daily life to think about going to a community board meeting for 3 hours. Is like, how the heck am I going to do that? I got my job and my kid, and I got to go to school, and all the things, right? And it's like, can I even get there? Like, transportation wise, can I even get there? You know what I mean? So it's very hard to ask a very overburdened population to step up more, and I think that's where the city really falls short, because when we do step up and we do organize ourselves and we do voice our opinions on what we want, like in the case of Adam Clayton Powell, it's an amazing campaign that you all have been running. You guys have been able to get over 2,500 signatures from community members in support of this corridor. You spent all the summer of 2022 just launching the campaign and hitting the streets, engaging with communities, having tough conversations, like overextending yourselves. And that's all like volunteers, you know what I'm saying? And you did all this work and we brought it to the DOT, and the DOT was like, oh, it's just not enough. We need more from you. And it's just like, all right, you can't expect as a city agency, as an elected official, the same kind of turnout and consistency and sustained work from volunteers that you can in a white affluent neighborhood. You go to a community board meeting in downtown Manhattan and it's for a bike lane, you can get 20, 30 people out to that meeting. It takes organizing, but you can do it. You go to Central Harlem and you try to get people out for a bike lane conversation, you're just gonna, or you're gonna get a handful of people. I mean, in many of the community boards in the Bronx, you can't even get quorum in a lot of these meetings, because it's not that the community doesn't care about itself. It's not that they don't want better things for themselves, right? That's racism as well, to have those notions. It is that they are overburdened.
They just didn't want it.
Right.
They just didn't want it bad enough.
And then when we do show up, it needs those 2 or 3 people that showed up in that Harlem meeting need to count more than that 20 or 30 people that showed up. I'm just sorry. It's when we're talking about equity, there needs to be a higher recognition of the effort put in communities of color and in outer boroughs and in underserved communities. There needs to be a higher recognition of what it takes to organize in those communities, and what it took for those 2 or 3 volunteers to show up to get those 2,500 signatures. That needs to get more recognition than maybe 10,000 signatures you were able to get in Lower Manhattan or downtown Brooklyn. Not to discount that work in those communities, but that's important recognition. Yeah.
Sure. But I do think it's high time the DOT get realistic about expectations. Like, even looking at the data, look, they put City Bike on there, and I can assure you the community board, if they could have stopped it, they probably would have. Community board chairman would have absolutely said no to every City Bike station there. They would have found something.
Even though Harlem loves City Bike now, and usership is really good in Harlem.
Everybody rides it in Harlem, like, except for a few people, obviously, but you're supposed to accommodate everybody.
Yeah.
It's like,
that's right.
Like, you want to try to accommodate the most amount of uses of, valuable street real estate as possible in a big city like New York, and really, I would say any city, should have the option to use whatever mode of transportation they want to.
And the other thing I would say, I forgot to add to that question, was like, the city needs to invest more money, more personnel. I mean, the DOT staff is very stressed. Like, I know a lot of great people at DOT, and they're very stressed. They're trying to do a lot with very little resources. The city needs to invest more resources for community outreach and communities of color and underserved communities, because you can't put out a call on a DOT website like, oh, come to this, listening session. No one's gonna come. You need to go where people are, and people organize themselves. Where are people in Harlem? They're at their religious institutions. They're in their education institutions. They're in public spaces,
Shop
coffee shops. You have to be where you have to go to where they are, right? Not expect them to
or
come
on
to you.
125th somewhere.
Right.
Randomly.
Post up on 125th, do a community survey on that corridor and see how many people want that infrastructure. That's what we did at TA, right?
I mean,
The
that
DOT
is
needs to do that kind of engagement.
what,
You know, go to the
and
local high school, see
right.
if those high school kids at Malcolm X Boulevard,
Yep, the bike
if
bus.
like see what the community really wants. You have to, but that takes money, and the city needs to invest in that kind of engagement, because then they can't come back and say like, hey, this neighborhood didn't want X, Y, and Z, even though we wanted it for them. No, you didn't really do the real engagement like you needed to.
But also, I'm looking at the data and the
Yeah.
statistics and all that, and it shows that uh, 80% of Harlemites, let's say,
Right.
I'm just taking this one instance of a black neighborhood where
It's a perfect
80
example.
to
Yeah.
90% of people in Harlem use the bus or the train or the bike or they walk to work.
It's mad.
And
Uh,
now, like, but even if they didn't, even if it was like a lower percentage,
yeah.
like, why shouldn't you accommodate those people
Right.
just because they're a small group? Oh, we shouldn't, next thing you're going to tell me, like, it's the same with like people with disabilities. Sure, there aren't a lot of them, but that doesn't mean we don't accommodate them.
Right. Right.
Like, that's my feeling. I wanted to get your
Yeah.
opinion on congestion pricing.
Let's talk about it.
Okay, I want TransAlt's opinion on congestion pricing, and if it's different, your opinion on congestion pricing.
So I would say, as an organization, we have been from day one in support of congestion pricing. We have been some of the biggest proponents of congestion pricing, proposing the idea to the city even through a lot of our advocacy in decades past. And really, in the past 10 to 15 years, have been one of the leaders on the advocacy front trying to push forward congestion pricing. We're in the middle of downtown Manhattan right now. We're on 22nd Street and Broadway. Look how many cars are coming through this corridor right now. I mean, it's a really, really beautiful example of what our city could look like, how pedestrians could occupy a space, how people could just have a better quality of life, less, environmental and health concerns because of pollution and traffic violence, just with these enhancements. And congestion pricing is not a magic bullet. It's not going to solve everything, but is a critical step forward in transforming how the city looks. And the money that will be raised via congestion pricing will give the MTA the ability to do these capital investments. This is important for people to understand. When people pay their fare for the MTA, and I'm not defending the MTA because I have a lot of critiques on how they manage their money as well. We can talk about that.
Yeah.
But in this
That's
instance,
everybody.
I mean, like, when people pay their fare, they're really paying for the sustainability of the current system, not major enhancements. They're paying for increased service. They're paying for personnel. That's what your fare is going to. The capital investments that we need, new bus lines, elevators, new train lines, those capital projects can only happen with the money that will be raised via congestion pricing. So the congestion pricing money will be going to capital projects, not service enhancements per se. And that's where I think a lot of people will get confused. All the things that we're calling for, making subways more accessible to people who have disability, making more bus lines in communities that are not being serviced, that are transit deserts, all that stuff is capital investment, and that's going to happen with congestion pricing. So a lot of people of color and a lot of people in the outer boroughs are like, we're going to get the short end of the stick with congestion pricing, when in fact, we have done the advocacy to make sure that the MTA earmarks where their money is going. And that money is going into the outer boroughs, is going investment in communities of color. And we're going to continue that advocacy to make
I
sure
didn't know
that it does. Yes.
I didn't know that. Did you know that? I didn't know that.
Now, there's other concerns around like the lack of ability to get into the congestion zone, 60th Street and below. So the question is though, like, will that create more commercial? I think this is a bigger issue, commercial traffic in the outer boroughs, notably the South Bronx, coming out of Hunts Point, coming from upstate New York, commercial trucks that do not want to pay the fare to come in the congestion zone. Will that create more pollution and environmental concerns in the outer boroughs, and specifically the South Bronx, which we know there's a lot of environmental racism and is an asthma valley? Those are real concerns, and the MTA has not done a great job around addressing those early. It has since, through a lot of advocacy and a lot of feedback that we've given the MTA, they've created a symposium of environmental justice organizations in communities of color to come together and advise the MTA on how to proceed with the work. They have really been in partnership with a lot of the local electeds in these communities, talking about how congestion pricing will service these neighborhoods, but the outreach has been poor. They have not gone into the Bronx and talk about what congestion pricing will mean to the service in the Bronx. And because of that, a lot of people are like, yo, we're about to get more pollution. The South Bronx has 4 times higher asthma rates than the rest of the nation. The rest of the nation, 4 times higher.
In the cars.
Yeah, we have the 3 highways.
Pollution, and
yes.
the 3 highways through everyone's neighborhood.
Exactly. And so there's concern, and that's real concern, but that's not a stance to be anti-congestion pricing. That's a let's be pro-congestion pricing, hold the MTA accountable, and then hold the city accountable to make sure they do it right. So when the congestion pricing launches, let's make sure we're in a position as advocates to then push it forward to make sure congestion pricing works and it serves all New Yorkers. And that's not guaranteed because we know how this city can be.
Yeah,
that's where the advocacy comes. Yes, they tend to forget.
They tend to implement and forget.
Yes, but we can't be anti. So my personal stance is I've had a lot of critiques over the MTA and how they've handled communication around congestion pricing. And they've actually made it hard for us as advocates who are pro-congestion pricing, especially advocates of color from the outer boroughs like me. I was born and raised in Harlem in the Bronx. So for me, the MTA has made it hard for me to speak to my community around congestion pricing. But that doesn't mean I'm going to be anti-congestion pricing. I'm going to have this critical support where I can go into spaces. I can go into a commune board meeting and be in favor of congestion pricing and at the same time critique the MTA in the city and make sure that they're doing it right. Hold the electeds accountable to make sure congestion pricing is done correctly. Because we know if it is, it will be transformative for the city. And it will be. Because we're moving forward.
I think it will help them raise some money to make capital improvements.
Yeah.
But you're right. It can't just go back into the richest areas of the country while disadvantaging, potentially disadvantaging.
Going to MTA board members' pockets,
Yeah. Potentially disadvantaging like Black and brown neighborhoods by saddling them with all the congestion, and they don't get anything for the trouble.
But on the same token, advocates in the congestion pricing space, people who are pro-congestion pricing, can't be dismissive of the concerns of people of color and people in the outer boroughs, because I've seen that a lot too in our space. People who are like, any ill word spoken about against congestion pricing, they're ready to attack. And I understand the spirit because it's such a critical
need it. I'm not going to say we don't need it.
Yes, exactly. But you also have to understand where people are coming from.
We need to keep people accountable. I think that's something about New York. We have trouble holding the government officials accountable for their corruption, soft or otherwise.
Yeah.
We tend to be like, oh, we're willing to, as long as it doesn't affect me, I can, we can look the other. Well, no, we probably shouldn't do that. We're setting a tone.
I mean, that's why a lot of other cities, like you said, internationally, are doing so much better on transit and all these environmental questions, because they know if they don't, the city might shut them down. General strikes and mass rallies.
Yeah.
We
They
are
don't.
definitely not in that position here in New York.
Yeah, yeah,
That
yeah.
people power.
France, in France, they didn't play. In
Exactly.
London, when I was there, they were protesting something, hospital workers or something, and I was like, "Holy
I
moly!"
mean, because they view advocacy, like I said, in a different way. They see it as critical for their
Uh,
government to be successful. We see advocacy as
Look at that
your,
weirdo.
yeah, your weirdo or your niece who's a lefty who went to college and got radicalized. Like that's not what advocacy only is. You know what I
What is
mean?
called? Yeah. Thank God. Oh, and yeah. So I keep I speaking of radicalized, I keep hearing people say that 15-minute cities is a gateway to communism. Like, oh, they want to keep you in your
Yeah.
box and they want to keep you in your sector. I'm like, to me, it's the most ridiculous thing ever. It's like some conspiracy thing.
Yeah.
But I wonder if there's any way, you know, you even entertain that or and try to come up with a reasoned response, or like, what do you say to those people?
I mean, there's always the weird kind of conspiracy theories that come up with this kind of stuff. I will tell you right now, even living in my reality as a man of color in New York City and all the things I have to deal with on a daily basis, I have a lot of privilege these days. And to share a little bit of my personal experience, me and my family live in the Lower East Side. We recently got into a lottery apartment in a high-rise building, and yeah, it's
Oh, you're
amazing.
never leaving.
I literally
Oh,
live in a 15-minute city now. I walk out my door, I can get all my groceries within, the Trader
congrats.
Joe's within
I'm
100 feet of my
very happy
doorstep.
for you.
I bicycle ride to work. It's 15 minutes.
Perfect.
There's nowhere I need to go. My daughter's school. There's no critical places that I need to go that I can't get within 15 minutes. I have full access to, medical facilities, many of them. My insurance covers. Like I live a really privileged reality in terms of my transit access. And when I explain that to people, it's like mind blowing because most New Yorkers do not live in that reality. And so I used to, when I was in my early 20s, I used to live in East New York, all the way deep in Brooklyn. I used to work in Inwood. I used to have a 2.5 hour commute on the train. I was so broke coming out of college that I only could use my bicycle because I couldn't afford to get on the train. It was a different reality, you know what I'm
So,
saying?
did you hear that, people? Some people are using their bicycle
Oh,
because the
100%.
train is could
100%.
potentially be too expensive for them, given whatever their bills and living situation is.
Yeah, 100%. But I used to live in reality where my daily transportation needs would be, at least 2 hours of my day. And that's not only city, people live in the suburbs, that's their reality. An hour to work, an hour home. And when you get into a 15-minute city and start living that reality, it's so transformative to your
Yeah, it's
quality of
freeing
life.
in a
It's
lot of ways.
freeing. I
It's
can travel
freeing.
2 hours, but that's by choice that I want to
That's
go
my
two
choice.
hours.
Yes,
And that's such
yes,
a,
you have
a,
the
a beautiful
choice.
freedom to have.
It's a choice.
Yeah,
Yes, you have the choice to travel. Also, I would say the freedom from car debt and
one thousand
worrying
percent,
about whether the gas is going to be a nickel more today
one
versus
thousand percent.
yesterday. Like,
Yeah.
to me, that's just, and they say now that it costs like 12 or $15,000 a year
Hmm.
for people on their car,
Hmm.
just to maintain it.
Yeah.
Like, to me, that's like, I don't know, that's a lot of money. You know what I
Hmm.
can do with 15 extra $1,000? Like, that's a new MacBook, that's a new iPhone, some bills can get paid. Maybe I can have a slightly
Hmm.
better apartment with central air and heat,
That's right.
or maybe I can live a block or two closer to the train or to work. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean,
I
these are
mean, the
things to
reality
think
is too
about.
is that the 15-minute city. There's a concept that people have to also understand. Just because where you live, 15-minute city is not the same for everybody. People have different mobility limitations. Like my mother, for instance, love my mother. She's invested so much in me, and my radical ideas.
Is
My
it radical
yeah,
though?
my mother though, she lives in what theoretically is a 15-minute city in East Harlem. She has access to a train 3 blocks away. She's next to Central Park. She has 2 major hospitals near her. But my mother, because of her mobility limitations, she can't get in up and down the stairs. She doesn't have access to an elevator. She can't access the public transportation near her because they don't have any elevators in the public transport. So she's really a prisoner to her reality. And that is,
Oh, so she's forced to be in the
yeah,
car, even if whether or not she even really wants to do
exactly.
that.
She has to go to a
That's
medical
her
appointment.
only option.
She has to, we have to get a ride share for her to go to a medical appointment, because there's no other way for her to do it physically. And I think that's important to, when we're talking about transforming our city, some people think it's a very ableist kind of thing, like, oh, you cyclists are just trying to take over the streets. No, we're talking about making a livable city for the most vulnerable, for children, for elderly, for people who are like, because once we have a city that those folks can get around, it's magical for everyone.
Yeah, that's how I've always seen things, is that when you make it great for the people who can't drive,
Hmm.
don't want to drive, you know, would rather walk or take the train or take the bus or cycle, whatever, you make it great for literally everyone. I'm not saying you're going to cancel cars or whatever people are talking about these days 100%. Like, to me, that's ridiculous, and that's not realistic. But what we can do is uh, provide more space to people and improve the infrastructure in New York City
That's right.
so that everybody has the ability to exist without owning a car or needing a car, if that's what they want to do.
Yeah. I mean, because our concepts are also, we might get like canceled for this. Our concepts are pro driver. If you're in a car, you want to drive down a street that you're not fearful that you're going to crash into somebody,
Right.
that you don't have tons of blind spots at the corners, that you're concerned a pedestrian or child's going to walk out and you might crash into them. You want to be able to drive in a city where you know your lane, it's clearly painted, it's clearly designated. Yeah, you might go a little slower. You might have trouble finding parking in certain neighborhoods. You might have some of these luxuries harmed a bit, for the betterment of society. But overall, your experience as a driver is going to be better.
Well,
I'll tell you, like, when I drive occasionally. I borrow friends' cars. I do a lot of car share and all this kind of stuff. When I drive, if I drive through Manhattan, especially in these corridors like this,
driving through Manhattan.
but what I'll say is that I feel
Nope.
safer. If I drive in the Bronx, where there's barely like car lanes painted, let alone bike lanes. There's no bike lanes, but there's no car lanes painted. There's no left turn light signals. It is the wild, wild west. It's really, really, you're living like any second now. I'm gonna get T-boned, or I'm gonna
super
catch
aggressive.
somebody. It's so aggressive. You have to drive aggressively. It just creates this culture, this toxic culture where everyone's screaming at each other, everyone's upset, everyone's angry, everyone's wasting money on gas,
yelling at each other, and they're
Yeah.
like on the edge. I can feel the people who are like
Yeah,
literally on the edge. Oh my gosh.
That's right.
And like I see it on their faces. And out of all the boroughs, save for maybe Staten Island, I haven't traveled there as much, but definitely the Bronx is the one that
Yeah.
I felt it the most.
mm-hmm.
I was like, okay,
Yeah,
there's really a lot of pent up
mm-hmm.
tension.
1,000%, 1,000%. It's really, I mean, that also plays out in who like cycles, right? So if you go into a neighborhood and you're like, oh, we don't need a bike lane because there's not that many cyclists. There's not that many cyclists because people are scared to death to ride their bike through that corridor. So they avoid it. As cyclists, we know what neighborhoods we definitely can't ride
Yes.
because we're going to get harassed, screamed at, potentially hit, all these kind of things. So that's a bad way to measure whether there's need for this infrastructure.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. It is. Well, Shawn, this was a wonderful talk. Did you have any like parting words or anything you wanted to say or add? Was there anything that we missed?
I mean, we talked about a bunch. We should definitely do more of these. So interested to hear what people
Yeah,
would
what do
like
you
to
want?
hear us like build on and talk more about. I mean, what I would say on the professional level, you know, as the director of advocacy at TA, I like to encourage people, if you're watching this video, if you're feeling inspired, but you don't know how to get involved, or it's too intimidating to think about
TA.
joining a meeting, or, you know, whatever it
TA's right
is,
there.
reach out to us, you know.
I'll put a link in the
Yeah,
comments.
you know, we'll put in the notes, we'll put all the links, but like reach out to me, you know, and I'll give you the direction on whether it's joining the work that we do or starting something locally where you are. But at the end of the day, it's that people power that's going to move our city forward. And if you live in a neighborhood that you feel isolated, you feel like there's no other people talking about this stuff, I mean, hopefully it's inspiring to see two men of color talking about these issues. It's not his, you know, the reality of what of who dominates these conversations. Hopefully that inspires you, and you know that you're not alone. But if you do feel isolated and no one in your school is talking about it, no one in your neighborhood is talking about these things, reach out to us and we can give you some community and some space.
Awesome, awesome. Well, thank you, everybody. Leave a comment. You know, leave. Yeah, I want to hear your comments. Like it. Subscribe to the channel. We will be doing more of these. Love interviewing people and hearing their thoughts and ideas. And you know, yeah, love to do it. All right. Thanks again, Shawn.
Thanks, man.
So good to see you.
Yeah, likewise. We enjoy the rest of the day.
Yes. Peace.